My daughter-in-law slapped me in the face and demanded my house keys. The slap was not the worst part. It was the sound it made, a flat, sharp crack that seemed to suck all the air out of my cozy living room. It was the way my head snapped to the side, the sting that bloomed hot and immediate on my cheek. It was the look on my son's face, David, a fleeting, gut-wrenching paralysis of horror before his features settled into a mask of pained resignation. But the worst part, the part that would echo in the hollows of my soul for a long time, was the words that followed. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, her hands still hovering in the air between us, her beautiful face contorted into a mask of such venomous entitlement, did not apologize. She did not gasp. She simply straightened the sleeve of her ridiculously expensive cashmere sweater and said, her voice cold and clear as ice, "Now give me the keys to this house, Evelyn. You're clearly not competent to live here alone anymore." The world tilted. My living room, a space filled with 40 years of memories, the faint ghost of my husband Arthur's pipe tobacco in the curtains, the scuff on the floorboards from David's toy cars, the patch on the wall where we'd measured his height every birthday, seemed to shrink and warp. This wasn't just a house. It was the archive of my life. And she was demanding its catalog. It had started so innocuously. A Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd clung to like a life raft since Arthur passed 2 years ago. David, my only child, and Chloe, his wife of 5 years, would come over. I would cook a roast, we would talk, and for a few hours, the silence of the big old house would be filled. Tonight, however, the air had been thick with a different kind of silence from the moment they arrived. "Something smells rustic, Evelyn," Chloe had said, her nose wrinkling slightly as she hung her designer coat on the antique stand by the door. She always used my first name. Never, Mom. It was a small, deliberate distance I'd learned to accept. "It's just your favorite, dear. Pot roast with rosemary and thyme from the garden," I'd said, forcing a smile. Dinner was a stilted affair. David was quiet, pushing his food around his plate. Chloe made pointed comments about the neighborhood. "Mrs. Gable's roses are so overgrown, it's bringing down the whole street's aesthetic, and the house itself. You know, Evelyn, these old windows are so drafty, and the stairs are a death trap. Have you thought about what it would take to modernize this place?" "It's home, Chloe," I'd said softly. "Arthur and I poured our hearts into it." "Sentiment doesn't pay the heating bill," she'd retorted, taking a delicate sip of wine. After dessert, we'd moved to the living room. That's when they'd sprung their trap. "Mom," David began, his voice unnaturally tight, "we need to talk about your future." "My future?" I'd laughed, a nervous little sound. "I'm 74, David. My future is right here, with my book club and my garden." "That's just it," Chloe cut in, leaning forward. Her eyes, usually so cool and assessing, were alight with a strange intensity. "This house is too much for you. The garden is a jungle. The upkeep is astronomical. You had a fall just last month." It had been a tiny stumble over a loose rug, a bruised knee, nothing more. I'd mentioned it to David in passing. Now it was being weaponized. "We've found a wonderful place for you," David continued, avoiding my eyes. "The Sunset Haven Assisted Living Community. It has a pool, activities, all your meals provided." My blood ran cold. Sunset Haven. I'd driven past it. It was a beautiful, sterile, soulless compound where people went to wait. It wasn't a home. It was a waiting room. "I'm not going to an old folks' home," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "It's not an old folks' home, Mom," David said, a note of exasperation creeping in. "It's for your own safety. We worry about you." "We worry about this asset sitting here, draining your resources," Chloe corrected, her mask of concern slipping. "This house is on a prime lot, Evelyn. We could sell it, use the money to secure your care, and have plenty left over to invest in our future. David's promotion is pending, and a liquid asset like this would be a huge show of stability." There it was. The truth, laid bare like a gutted fish. It wasn't about me. It was about my house. The 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom Victorian that Arthur and I had bought as a shell and turned into a home, its value skyrocketing as the city grew around it. "No," I said, the word firm, final. "This is my home. Arthur left it to me. I am not leaving, and I am not selling. This conversation is over." I stood up, my legs shaking. That's when Chloe stood too, her movements swift and aggressive. "You selfish old woman," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what we could do with that money? The life we could build. You're just clinging to a pile of bricks and memories while we're trying to move forward." "Chloe, that's enough," David said, but his voice was weak, a plea rather than a command. "No, David, it's not enough. She's holding you back. She's always held you back." And then it happened. As I turned to walk away, to retreat to the sanctuary of my kitchen, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. I pulled away, and in that fluid motion of her frustration and rage, her hand connected with my face. The slap. The sting was a brand. The silence that followed was a vacuum. And then the demand. "Now give me the keys." I looked at my son. "David." He looked at the floor, at his hands, anywhere but at me. "Mom, maybe it's for the best. Just for a little while. We can put your things in storage." Something inside me broke. Not with a shatter, but with a quiet, definitive snap. The part of me that was just David's mother, the gentle, accommodating widow, retreated. Another part, a part one hadn't known still existed, the woman who had stood beside Arthur as they fought zoning laws and weathered financial storms, stirred and rose to the surface. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked Chloe dead in the eye, my cheek burning, and I smiled. It was a small, cold, terrible smile. "No," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "You will never get the keys to this house." I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air felt like a balm on my heated skin. "Get out of my home." Chloe stared, incredulous. David finally looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. "You can't be serious," Chloe scoffed. "I have never been more serious in my life," I replied. "Get out. Now. Or the next sound you hear will be me calling the police to report an assault and attempted robbery." "The word robbery der." David's face went pale. He took Chloe's arm. "Come on. Let's go." They left. Chloe shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred before walking out. David paused on the threshold, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. No words came out. He just looked broken. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt, the solid thunk a period at the end of the sentence. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, and only then, in the profound and sudden silence, did I allow the tears to come. They were not tears of weakness, but of grief, for the son I thought I had, for the betrayal that cut deeper than any slap, for the terrifying loneliness of the battle I now knew I had to fight. The war for my home had begun. The first week was the hardest. De initial adrenaline faded, living a cold, gnaving fear. I was alone. They were my only family. What if they tried to have me declared incompetent? Chloe was cunning enough, and David would go along with it, too weak to stand up to her. I saw my future stretching out, a courtroom, doctor's evaluations, being forcibly removed from my home and placed in a cell of beige walls and scheduled bingo nights. I couldn't let that happen. My first call was to Arthur's old friend, Benjamin Croft. Ben was a retired lawyer, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. I hadn't spoken to him much since Arthur's funeral, but his number was still in the old leather-bound address book. "Evelyn," his gruff voice came down the line. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I told him everything. The dinner, the Sunset Haven, the slap, the demand for the keys. The words tumbled out, messy and raw. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Put the kettle on." Ben arrived, a stout, solid man in his late 70s, his eyes still holding the keen intelligence that had made him a legend in the courtroom. He listened without interruption as I went through it all again, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he placed his large, age-spotted hand over mine. "Evelyn, I am so sorry. What David has allowed to happen is unconscionable. What do I do, Ben? They're going to try and take my house." "Not if I have anything to say about it," he said, his voice firm. "First, we make you a fortress. You have a will. Arthur left everything to me, and then to David. We're changing that. Immediately. We'll create a new will and a revocable living trust. The house and your assets go into the trust. You are detruste. You control everything. If anyone tries to claim you're incompetent, they have to fight the trust, not just you. It's a much harder, more expensive battle. And if they try to have me declared incompetent?" "We get ahead of it," Ben said, his eyes glinting. "You'll see your doctor this week. Get a full physical and cognitive assessment. We'll have a clean bill of health on record, establishing your sound mind. We build a paper fortress around you." It felt like taking a first, deep breath after being underwater. I had a plan. I had an ally. The next day, I saw Dr. Evans. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s. When I told her why I needed the assessment, her lips tightened. "I see this far too often, Evelyn. It's a form of elder abuse. We'll make sure you're documented as perfectly capable." I aced the cognitive tests. My physical was fine for a woman of my age. I had arthritis in my knees and slightly high blood pressure. That was all. I walked out with a letter stating I was of sound mind and body, fully capable of managing my own affairs. Next, I went to the bank with Ben. We changed all my passwords, removed David's name from the small savings account I'd added him to for emergencies, and set up new security protocols. The manager, a young man who knew me, was somber and efficient. With each action, I felt a little stronger. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow. I was a general fortifying her position. David called. His voice was strained, full of a manufactured concern that made me nauseous. "Mom, we're just worried about you. We acted rashly. Chloe feels terrible. Can we come over and talk?" "No," David said, my voice calm. "We cannot. Until you and your wife can offer a genuine, unqualified apology for assaulting me and trying to steal my home, you are not welcome here." "Mom, that's not fair. We weren't trying to steal. Weren't you?" Interrupted. "You demanded the keys to my house so you could sell it out from under me. What would you call that?" He was silent. I heard Chloe hissing something in the background. "I have things to do, David. Goodbye." I hung up. My hand was shaking, but my resolve was stone. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't lonely, it was purposeful. I started projects I'd put off for years. I cleaned out the attic, finding boxes of David's childhood things, his baseball mitt, his science fair trophies, his drawings. Each one was a little dagger to the heart, but I didn't pack them away. I left them out. They were reminders of what I was fighting for, the truth of our family, not the distorted version Chloe was peddling. I also started gardening with a vengeance. My garden had always been my solace, a lush, slightly wild English-style cottage garden that Arthur had loved.
Now, e ataque de veeds, prune de roses, and planted new lavender.
The physical labor was a tonic.
The earth under my hands was real, growing.
My neighbors, of course, noticed. The grapevine in a street like ours was a robust organism.
Muriel Gable, cheof de overgrown roses, came over one afternoon with a basket of scones.
I saw your son and that wife of his leave in a hurry the other night, she said, her eyes sharp with curiosity.
Everything all right, Evelyn.
I was tempted to lie, to preserve the facade of a happy family. But I was done with facades. No, Muriel, it's not, I said, inviting her in. I told her about the slap. I saw her eyes widen in horror, then narrow in fury. The nerve, she spat. That little gold digger. And David. I never thought he had it in him to be so spineless. You know, Evelyn, you're not alone. My niece, Sarah, went through something similar. It's more common than you think. Muriel became my second lieutenant. She was the eyes and ears of the neighborhood. She spread the story, not as gossip, but as a warning and a rallying cry. Casseroles started appearing on my doorstep. Offers to help with groceries. Invitations for coffee. The community was closing ranks around me, a human shield against my own family. A month after the slap, I received a formal-looking letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Wexler and Stern. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The first legal salvo. I called Ben immediately and read it to him. It's a fishing expedition, he grunted after a moment. They're petitioning for a capacity hearing. They're claiming concerns about your welfare and financial decision-making. It's standard scare tactics. They're hoping you'll fold. What do? We respond with a cannon, Ben said. I'll draft a response. We'll include Dr. Evans' assessment, character references, and a detailed account of the events of that night, including the assault. We'll make it very clear that this is a predatory action by a daughter-in-law, enabled by a weak-willed son, and that they have zero chance of success. And so, the paper war began. Ben's response was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. He didn't just defend me, he went on the offensive, detailing Chloe's history of financial profligacy, which Muriel had helped me quietly uncover through her network. Apparently, Chloe's shopping habits were legendary, and David's recent professional setbacks. He painted a picture of a couple desperate for a cash infusion, willing to bulldoze an elderly widow to get it. We heard nothing back for 2 weeks. Then, David showed up alone. I saw him through the peephole, standing on my porch, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a little boy. For a moment, the mother in me ached to open the door, to hug him, to tell him it would all be okay. But the woman with a faint, lingering yellow bruise on her cheek held firm.
Go away, David said through the door.
Mom, please.
I need to talk to you.
I'm so sorry. Are you?
Are you sorry your wife hit me?
Or are you just sorry your legal strategy failed? He was silent for a long time. Both, he finally whispered, his voice thick with tears. I'm so ashamed, Mom. I don't know what happened to me. Chloe happened to you, I said, my own tears starting to fall. I leaned my head against the door, as if I could feel his presence through the wood. You chose her, David. You stood there and you let her hit me, and then you demanded my keys.
My son, my beautiful boy. E hard arranged sob from the other side.
I lost my job, Mom.
De confession ung in the air.
What? The promotion. It fell through. Then they downsized my whole department. It happened a week before we came over for dinner. I was panicking. Chloe was panicking. We have a huge mortgage, car payments, her credit card debt. She convinced me that the house was the only way out. That it was just a house, that you'd be happier with less to worry about. I was weak. I was scared.
E let her convince me.
My heart broke for him, even as my anger simmered. It was no excuse. There was no excuse. But it was an explanation. That doesn't make it right, David. I know. I know that now. The lawyer's letter, it made me see what we had become. What I had become. I'm staying in a hotel. Chloe and we're done. She left when the money dried up. He was crying openly now.
Desauditori et me.
I can't let you in, David, I said, my voice soft but firm. Not today. The trust is gone. It will take a long, long time to rebuild that, if it can ever be rebuilt at all. You need to figure out your life on your own, without my house as a safety net. I understand, he whispered. After a moment, I heard his footsteps retreating down the porch steps. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and wept. I wept for the son I had raised, for the man he had failed to become, for the grandchild I would probably never have. The victory felt hollow, ash in my mouth. The months that followed were a slow, painful journey through a landscape of grief. David found a new job, a less prestigious one, and a small apartment. He called me once a week. Our conversations were stilted, polite, and full of a cavernous space where love used to be. He never asked for money. He never mentioned the house. He was trying, I could see that. But the shadow of that slap would always be between us. I threw myself into my life. I became more active in the community center, teaching a gardening class for seniors. I had my friends over for loud, laughter-filled dinners that made the old house ring with joy. I lived. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year to the day after the slap, I was in the garden, planting tulip bulbs for the spring. A car pulled up. It was David. He got out, holding a small pot of yellow chrysanthemums. He stood by the gate, not presuming to come in. Can I come in, Mom? I looked at him, at the hopeful, terrified look in his eyes. The anger was gone. All that was left was a deep, weary sadness, and a tiny, stubborn flicker of a mother's love. I nodded. He walked up the path and handed me the flowers. I'm sorry, he said, his voice simple and clear.
No excuses. No justifications.
Just the 2 words I had needed to hear a year ago. Thank you, I said. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. The garden looks beautiful, he said. It's coming along. He took a deep breath. I'm seeing a therapist, trying to figure out how I let it all happen.
I'm glad, David. Another silence.
Then he gestured to the porch. Can we sit? We sat on the porch swing, the same one Arthur had installed 30 years ago. We didn't talk much.
We just sat, listening to the rustle of the leaves, watching the sandapple through the maple tree.
He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't demand a place back in my life. He was just there, present. And for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like a performance. As he was leaving, he turned to me at the door. I love you, Mom. I love you too, David, I said. And I did. I always would. But it was a different love now. It was a love that knew its own boundaries, that had been tempered in a fire of betrayal. It was a love that could never again be taken for granted. I closed the door after he left.
I valke fru Mike e house, honey my hand over the familiar banister, touching the frame of a family photo on the wall.
The sting on my cheek was long gone. The memory of it was not.
My revenge was not a dramatic, triumphant victory.
It was not seeing Chloe ruined or my son groveling. My revenge was quieter, more profound. It was my continued existence in this house, on my own terms. It was the strength I found in myself when I had nowhere else to look. It was the garden I tended, the friends I cherished, the life I built for myself, unbowed. My revenge was a life lived fully, a fortress of my own making. And as I picked up my trowel and went back to my tulip bulbs, I knew, with a deep, unshakable certainty, that no one would ever again try to take my keys. The woman who had been slapped was gone. In her place was someone who knew how to fight for her kingdom.